Mini PCs have been taking the world by storm in recent years. It's incredible how much power you can pack into a small space in this day and age. From Raspberry Pis to Mac Minis to Intel NUCs, small computers have gone from limited devices that were only used for a handful of niche situations to surprisingly powerful machines that can handle the vast majority of people's daily tasks. And recently, a company called GEEKOM offered one to us that sounded particularly interesting. They call it the IT12. For under $500, it has a 12th generation Intel i7, a 1TB SSD, and a very respectable 32GB of RAM. These are similar specs to an Intel NUC 12, yet for a third less of the cost. But how capable is it really? Well, we decided to take them up on their offer and see for ourselves. Frequent researcher for the channel Ramen2X has been trialing it for the past few weeks and putting it through its paces. While this video is sponsored by GEEKOM, these are our honest thoughts and opinions based on our experience with the product. Ramen had coincidentally been looking for a suitable device to serve as an emulation media center, something he could hook up to his TV to play games, emulators, and stream content from major streaming services. Before this, he had used an Apple TV, which, while great for streaming media, due to the Apple-ness of the platform, its emulation capabilities are lacking, even when jailbroken. Many emulator developers simply don't target tvOS, and it's understandable why. This is a niche inside a niche. Even with Apple finally allowing emulators onto the App Store in 2024, it's just a reality that not many people are using or buying these devices for that sort of thing. It's a bit of a shame since there's a lot of potential in the platform, but who knows if it'll ever get there. So for the last few months, his hacky solution was to actually use a modded Nintendo Switch running Android TV, which is possible thanks to a Lineage OS port created by the SwitchRoot project. This actually does work surprisingly well, but it still wasn't quite good enough for what he needed. Once again, Android TV is great for content since all of the major streaming services have native Android TV apps that all work well on the Switch, but when it came to emulation or PC games, it was a different story. The biggest problem was simply the bottleneck of the hardware. The Nintendo Switch is essentially a glorified tablet from 2015. Literally, its SoC is the exact same one used in the Nvidia Shield TV from May 2015. So while a lot of emulators and games worked pretty well with this setup, anything past the N64 PS1 era had pretty rough performance. While something like Dolphin does run, few games could actually perform at their maximum frame rate. It became clear he needed a dedicated PC to do what he wanted, but this can be easier said than done, depending on what's available to you. Do you spend potentially thousands of dollars on a new PC, or gradually scrape together cheap parts until you get something reasonably usable? This is what interested him so much about the GEEKOM. It seemed to be an affordable yet decently spec'd system. Better specs than a Nintendo Switch at least. The offer had come at the perfect time. It hadn't crossed his mind before to look into the mini PC market, but it actually made a lot of sense. A mini PC can offer decent performance while also being small enough that it's easy to tuck away in just about any entertainment setup. Potentially, this makes for a kind of best of both worlds situation. Could this be the perfect opportunity to replace his Frankenstein Android TV Switch? Well, after using it for a few weeks, he's convinced. Despite its size, the IT12 is surprisingly powerful and efficient, handling almost all of the tasks he gave it while only sipping roughly 90 watts of power. This is kind of an underrated advantage of a mini PC. If he had built a full desktop PC, it would have required several times that, but the mini PC delivers quietly without driving up his energy bill. It also comes equipped with Wi-Fi 6 and 2.5 gigabit per second LAN, perfect for media streaming. Opening up the box and turning it on, it comes with Windows 11 pre-installed, which is all well and good, but his, like mine, is a Linux household, so he immediately replaced it with Arch. That being said, he did mention one thing about using Windows 11 on here. There was no bloat that you too often see pre-installed on OEM computers. It's just a clean install of vanilla Windows 11 pre-activated. Anyone who's been terrorized by OEM bloatware before knows how nice it is to just have a clean install. As you might expect, streaming media is no problem for the IT12. Ramen thinks this is where the 32GB of RAM really shines. On the surface, that much RAM for a media center device may seem like overkill, but modern websites, especially ones that stream content, are absolute resource hogs, and the 32GB allows it to handle switching between multiple tabs and streams with no trouble. It turns a potentially single-use device into something that's a lot more flexible. There's not much else to say in this regard. Pretty much any piece of hardware with network connectivity made in the last decade can stream media, so it was a given that this would be smooth sailing. But compared to what he was used to, it was still nice just how well it worked. But without further ado, let's get to the real exciting part of this media center project: gaming and emulation. At first, he was a little skeptical about how this would pan out because the IT12 sadly does not have a dedicated GPU. This makes sense given the mini PC's size, but it had been years since he last used Intel integrated graphics, and back then his experience was not great. At that time, a combination of poor drivers and poor support meant that emulators generally had a lot of trouble on Intel integrated graphics, ranging from poor performance to glitches and crashes. But fast forward to 2025 and he actually ended up being pleasantly surprised by the results. Integrated graphics have come a long way, and while there's still no replacement for a dedicated GPU, he found that IT12 could emulate everything from retro consoles all the way to pretty modern consoles like the PS3 and Wii U. He was even able to run some relatively modern PC games from his Steam library just fine. This was a huge upgrade from what he was dealing with before with his Nintendo Switch setup. Here, the Switch was handicapped not just by its lack of raw power, but also its ARM-based architecture, meaning just about every game's CPU instructions would have to be translated at runtime, further decimating performance. He had actually briefly messed around using WinLater on the Switch for x86 Windows games, but the overhead just suffocated the lowly Tegra X1 in most games. Although Intel graphics are definitely still treated as secondary by a lot of emulators for valid reasons, a lot of things he tested on this PC just ran, without needing any tinkering or hacks to get working. Of course, adjust your expectations accordingly. If you're a video editor, you'll probably get by for simple, straightforward videos, but if you're loading tons of video sources and GPU-heavy effects, you'll probably want something a little more powerful. Likewise, if you're all about playing the latest PC games in 4K and ultra settings, you'll probably be disappointed by the lack of dedicated GPU. But for light or even moderate gaming and emulation, a humble mini PC today is often good enough. Another nice thing about this mini PC compared to others like the Mac Mini is it is upgradable to some extent. The RAM and SSD aren't soldered to the board, so as long as they fit in the small case, you can replace them. Unfortunately, the CPU is soldered onto the motherboard as you might expect, but it's nice to have at least some options at a time when we're getting fewer and fewer of them. So the GEEKOM IT12. On the one hand, it's a pretty run-of-the-mill mini PC, but there's nothing wrong with something that does exactly what you expect it to do. In Raman's case, pretty much everything he wanted to accomplish with it was doable straight out of the box with no friction. He had no trouble installing and using Arch Linux and setting everything up exactly the way he wanted. It is worth mentioning that there have been reports online about some people getting units that were dead on arrival. We can't really speak to any of that because our unit worked flawlessly, but there's a chance that what you gain in cost savings you might lose in quality control. Just something to keep in mind if you do end up buying one of these. But assuming you get one that works and the specs and price are suitable for your situation, it otherwise seems extremely solid. Now Raman can finally reinstate his Switch as an actual game console again. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye guys.